You have probably already tried this. The drawer you emptied, the bags you drove to the donation bin, the clean shelf you photographed because it finally looked like the picture. And then quietly over about a year, the house filled again. Minimalism is not about owning less. That is the part everyone got wrong. The version we inherited is a subtraction problem. Count your things, reduce the number, feel lighter. And it fails for almost everyone who tries it, because a number is not a relationship. The weight you were feeling was never the count. So you empty the drawer. You feel clean for a month. It refills, and you decide the problem is that you are not disciplined enough. You are not the problem. The instruction was. Minimalism is not about owning less. There is a word in the Yoga Sutras, an ancient text, at least 1500 years old, less a scripture than an early manual for training attention, that gets translated as non-possessiveness, which is not quite right. The word is aparigraha, and the root of it is closer to not grasping. It sits in a list of restraints alongside non-violence and truthfulness. And notice what it does not say. It sets no number. It names no threshold. It is not a rule about how much you may own. It is a description of how you are holding it. That distinction is everywhere once you see it, and almost every tradition that took the question seriously arrived at the same place independently. The Buddha tried the other version first. Long before the teaching, he is now known for a middle way between indulgence and self-denial. The traditional accounts describe 6 years of genuine starvation, ribs against skin, the full ascetic program. And he abandoned it not because it was too hard, but because he noticed it had become its own obsession. A man counting his last grain of rice is still a man thinking about rice all day. The extreme of having and the extreme of not having turned out to be the same posture, wearing different clothes. That same posture has a mascot in Western philosophy too, and he gets held up as a hero for exactly the wrong reason. Diogenes gets told as the punchline of minimalism, the man in the barrel. The story goes that he owned a single wooden cup, and one day saw a boy drinking from his cupped hands and threw the cup away. We tell it as the summit of the practice, but look at it again. He was still keeping score, still measuring himself against an object. If keeping score has nothing to do with how much you actually own, the strangest proof of that isn't a Greek with a cup. It's two Romans who had nothing in common except the philosophy. Seneca was one of the wealthiest men in Rome. Estates, influence, a fortune large enough to be a political liability. Epictetus was born a slave. They wrote nearly the same philosophy. If a teaching about attachment works identically at both ends of that range, then it was never a teaching about quantity. The book that gave the modern movement, its language gets misread on exactly that point. Henry David Thoreau built a small cabin by Walden Pond, near Concord, Massachusetts, in 1845, and lived there alone for 2 years and 2 months. He wrote a book about it called Walden, and people remember the cabin, the beans he grew, the isolation, and file the whole thing under austerity. But what he actually wrote was that he went to the woods to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life. And deliberately is not a synonym for sparsely. He was not testing how little a man could survive on. He was removing everything that had been chosen for him, so that what remained would have been chosen. Whether his mother did some of his laundry, as the popular version of the story goes, is something historians still argue about. What is certain is that he was not the hermit the story makes him out to be. His family lived close by, and he walked into town constantly, by his own account. Which people bring up as hypocrisy, and which is only hypocrisy if you thought the point was austerity in the first place. The Japanese have a word for the space between things, ma, not emptiness as absence, but emptiness as the thing that lets an object mean anything at all. A room with one bowl in it is not a room missing furniture. It is a room where the bowl can finally be seen. The same principle runs through their gardens, their architecture, the pauses in their music. The interval is not what is left over when you remove the content. The interval is content. 6 traditions, 2 continents, 1500 years apart, every one of them drew the same line. And it never fell between having and not having. It fell between holding and clenching. Now here is what makes this more than a nice idea, because there is a measurable version of it. Your visual cortex does not process a room. It processes objects, and when several sit in the same field of view, they compete. Their neural representations actively suppress one another. This is not a metaphor about feeling overwhelmed. It is what the tissue does, measured directly in the lab. It is a reasonable way to understand why a cluttered surface feels expensive rather than merely ugly. You are spending capacity there that you meant to spend somewhere else. Then there is what ownership does to judgment. In a now-famous experiment, people were handed a mug and asked what they would sell it for. Others were shown the same mug and asked what they would pay. The sellers wanted more than twice as much. Nothing about the mug had changed, only who was holding it. Psychologists call this the endowment effect, and it means something uncomfortable. The question, "Do I really need this?" is one you are neurologically unable to answer accurately about an object already in your hands. There is a reason the emptying never holds, too. The pleasure of acquiring decays on a curve so reliable it has a name: hedonic adaptation. Whatever you bought stops registering. The baseline resets. And the thing that fixed the feeling last time no longer produces the feeling, so you go looking again. The most quoted study on this followed people who had won large lottery prizes and found them, not long after, reporting roughly the ordinary happiness of everyone else, and taking measurably less pleasure in small daily things than the people around them who hadn't won. The win had not raised them. It had recalibrated what counted as pleasant. And more options do not help. In a supermarket, researchers set out a tasting table of 24 jams on some days and 6 on others. The larger display drew more people over, of course it did, it was more interesting. But of the people who stopped at the 24, almost none bought anything. The ones who stopped at the 6 bought about 10 times as often. More choice produced more attention and less action, and the people facing the larger array reported being less satisfied with whatever they finally picked. That is worth sitting with, because it is the whole mechanism in one experiment. The abundance was not experienced as richness. It was experienced as work. And objects recruit other objects. Denis Diderot wrote an essay in the 1760s about a beautiful new dressing gown he had been given, and how, next to it, his old chair looked shabby, so he replaced the chair, and then the desk, and then the shelves, until he had renovated an entire study he had been perfectly content with. He described himself as the slave of his new dressing gown. One object arrived and quietly summoned the rest. Underneath all of it sits the simplest finding. Unfinished things stay resident in memory, in a way finished things do not. Every object you own that still carries an unresolved decision, the maybe, the one day, the I should really deal with this, is an open loop, and it is running whether or not you are looking at it. Your mind does not distinguish between owning a thing and tracking it. I did not understand that line, holding versus clenching, until I lost the choice entirely. It happened by moving countries. When you emigrate, everything you own becomes whatever you can carry. Not by choice, not as practice, not because you read something. There is a weight limit and there is a fee, and the whole of a life gets negotiated down to what fits. Things I had kept for years lost their argument in about 10 minutes. And what surprised me was not the leaving. It was how little I thought about any of it afterwards. Almost nothing I released came back to me as loss. I could not, 6 months later, have listed what was gone. Then the new place filled up. Of course it did. Slower at first, then at the ordinary speed. And there were years where money was tight enough that every object in the house had to justify itself out loud. And I noticed something I have not been able to unnotice since. Scarcity had made me precise. I knew exactly why each thing was there. And when things eased, that precision was the first thing I lost, long before the house looked full again. That is when it stopped being about stuff. The clarity had never come from having less. It came from having to know why. So the question was wrong the whole time. It was never how little can I live with. It is, what is this doing here? And that question has only 3 honest answers. It is here because I use it. It is here because it genuinely gives me joy, not the memory of joy, not the joy I hoped it would give me, the joy it gives me now. Or it is here because I have not decided yet. The first two earn their place at any number. You can own a great deal and hold none of it. The third is the whole problem, and it does not care how big your house is, because an undecided object is not an object. It is a small open question wearing the shape of a thing. And this is where the honest version gets harder than the photogenic one, because the undecided things are rarely the obvious clutter. They are the good jacket that does not fit anymore and might again, so you have never actually decided whether to let it go. The gift from someone you love that you have never once wanted, where keeping it feels like the only proof that you loved them back. The equipment for the person you are going to become, who you have not yet decided you will not be. None of that is junk. Every one of them is a decision you have been carrying instead of making. And the reason the drawer refills is that emptying a drawer was never going to make any of those decisions for you. Which also means the practice is not an event. There is no weekend where you finish. The traditions understood this. Aparigraha sits in a list of restraints, things you keep returning to, not a task with a completion date. What changes is not the house. What changes is how long you let a question stay open. Which is why counting never worked. You can throw out 40 items and keep every open question in the room. And you can own something for 30 years and hold it lightly, because you know precisely what it is doing there. The test is not the number. The test is whether you could say without hesitating why it is there. The room you actually want is not empty. It is a room where nothing is waiting for you to decide about it.